In this video, I am going to focus on how the budget can be used as an effective benchmark for evaluating actual performance. Now, because it's most likely the case that sales and production quantity are different than what was planned on, before we can use the budget as a really useful tool for evaluating performance, we need to flex it so that the sales and production quantity is the same as the actual quantity. All right, so that's called creating a flexible budget. So let's talk about how to do that. First of all, let's talk about our scenario. We're going to focus on a company that makes a very simple product, wooden spin tops. I actually really like wooden spin tops, thanks to my 8th grade shop teacher, Mr. Franklin, who allowed me to make wooden tops on a lathe. At any rate, let's assume that before the period begins, this wooden top company has the following standards and estimates. First, they expect to sell 16,200 tops at a sales price, an average sales price of $4.25 per top. The amount of wood required for each top is 0.2 linear feet, and the wood costs $2 per linear foot, so that's 40 cents worth of wood. The direct labor that's required for each top is 0.1 hours or 6 minutes per top, and at a rate of $12 per hour, that ends up being $1.20 of labor per top. Now, the manufacturing overhead has two components. First, we've got variable manufacturing overhead, such as electricity that we use for the machines, or lubricant on the machines, or maybe some varnish that we put on the wood. It's hard to track how much goes to each top. So we allocate that, and the way we do that is we allocate it at a rate of $10 per direct labor hour per top. All right, and then we've got fixed overhead costs that consist of things like depreciation on the machinery or property taxes on the facility where we make the tops. With that in mind, let's go ahead and create the budgeted income statement before the fiscal period begins. All right, I've got the basic structure here for this budgeted income statement. Let's pretty it up a little bit and bolden the title here. Then I have revenue at the very top. After that, I'm going to use a contribution margin format income statement. So after revenue, I'm going to subtract all the variable costs. And I've got 3 categories of variable costs: direct material, direct labor, and variable manufacturing overhead. These will all change based on how many tops we produce and sell. Next, I've got the contribution margin, which is the difference between revenue and the variable cost. We then have fixed costs, and then the operating profit is the last number in here. Let's go ahead and enter the numbers in here now. So for revenue, our budgeted revenue would be our budgeted number of sales tops times our budgeted sales price of $4.25. So that's $68,850 in revenue. For direct material, the amount that we would budget would be the 16,200 tops times 40 cents per top. For direct labor, it's 16,200 tops times $1.20 per top. And variable overhead's slightly different. It's going to be the 16,200 tops times $10 per direct labor hour times 0.1 direct labor hours per top. So that's a total of $16,200 in variable overhead cost. All right, then the contribution margin will be the difference between revenue, and then we'll subtract off the sum of these 3 variable costs here. All right, so that gives us a contribution margin of $26,730. To help us keep track of this being a summary number, I'm going to put a border on the top of that cell so we can tell that's the difference. All right, then we'll enter the fixed costs in here, which are just $7,500. And then the resulting operating profit, the key number, is the difference between the contribution margin and the fixed costs. And I will format this by using a top and double bottom border, which is common in accounting. All right, so this is our budgeted income statement. Now let's fast forward to after the fiscal period is over and look at what our actual results are. So let's assume that our actual number of tops produced and sold is 15,850. And let's assume that our actual income statement is as follows. We've got $66,570 in revenue, and then these costs, and then the resulting operating profit, which is $13,148.95. So the first thing you might do when using a budget to evaluate actual results is probably focus on the profit. At least that's what I would do. And I notice real quickly here that our profit is about 1/3 less than expected. Okay, we only made $13,000 instead of $19,000. Hey, it's positive, that's good, but it's not as high as we wanted it to be. So the next thing might be to ask yourself why that's the case. We know that we sold less tops than expected, but did we sell them for the same sales price as expected? Did we use the right amount of material, labor, and variable overhead? Were our fixed costs different than expected? All right, so I might go down through the different line items and start making comparisons. Well, it's easy to see that direct labor and variable manufacturing overhead are more than expected. And that's particularly bad because we made fewer tops than expected. So we can see that something is out of control there in an unfavorable way. On the other hand, it's easy to see that fixed costs are less than expected, not by very much, but they are less. All right, what gets tricky though is when we get to something like direct material cost. The reason why this is tricky is because direct material costs are less. However, we would expect them to be less because we made and sold fewer tops than expected. So comparing these two numbers is not really meaningful when it comes to the variable costs and revenue. To help make this comparison more meaningful, we are going to create a flexible budget, which essentially answers the question, what would our budgeted income statement have looked like if we could have perfectly predicted the actual amount of wooden tops that we produced and sold? To do that, I'm going to insert a new column in here, and I will call this my flexible budget. And this flexible budget is simply the actual number of units produced and sold times the standard price and cost per top. All right, so specifically, we'll take the 15,850 units times the estimated sales price of $4.25 per unit to get our flexible budget revenue of $67,362.50. Similarly, for direct material, we'll take the 15,850 tops that we actually produced and sold times 40 cents per top. For direct labor, 15,850 tops times $1.20 per top. For variable manufacturing overhead, 15,850 tops times $10 per direct labor hour times 0.1 direct labor hours per top. And I'll just jump down to fixed costs. If we could have perfectly predicted what our actual quantity was going to be, our fixed costs should not have changed. So that will be the same as what's on our budgeted income statement of $7,500. And for the contribution margin, I can just click on this little square in the bottom right-hand corner and drag that across there and double check this and see that, yeah, it automatically updated. This is a great thing about Excel. It says, hey, we want this calculation to be a similar one to what's in column F here. So we're going to take that revenue minus the sum of those variable costs. And we'll do the same thing with operating profit. Okay, so that is our flexible budget. That's how we create it. It's very simple to create, but it's a powerful idea because now we can make a more meaningful comparison among all these different variable revenues and costs because they're all based on the same quantity of 15,850 tops. Specifically, we can now look at the direct material costs and we can see that even if we had reduced the amount of direct material cost on our budget that would be required for 15,850 tops, it's still a lot more than what we actually spent on wood. So for whatever reason, we were able to have a lot of savings in direct material. On the other hand, when we look at direct labor and variable overhead, now the appropriate benchmark is lower than what's on the budgeted income statement. So now what we actually spent on direct labor and variable overhead is an even bigger difference in the wrong direction, in the wrong way. It's more costly than expected. So in conclusion, a flexible budget is a really useful starting point for evaluating actual performance because it adjusts for what our budgeted income statement would have looked like if we could have perfectly predicted the actual sales quantity. In future lessons, we'll dig deeper into the specific line items and try to understand why we spent more or less than expected.